Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at Pelikan Edelstein Golden Lapis. I'll be doing a writing sample on 52 GSM Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. I'll take a look at some writing samples that I did on other types of paper. I'll compare Golden Lapis to similar blue inks from my collection. And finally, I'll take a look at the water resistance test and the chromatography for this ink. The writing sample that I did with a glass dip nib felt pleasant. The line it put down was wet but uniform. The swatch I made with tweezers was crisp, and there's not a tremendous amount of difference between the darker shade and the lighter shade, but it is more noticeable in real life than it is here on camera. I would say the lightest bit looks a little more turquoise than blue, where it looks a little more blue down here on this end, but my camera's notorious for not representing teals and turquoises very accurately. The drip at the end of the swatch has just a hint of magenta sheen in the halo, but it's hard to see it because of all the shimmer. I'm going to begin with a Pilot Kuno. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. I was expecting this little smear here to be wetter, to have more ink, because this feels very, very pleasant. I was expecting this ink to be more watery because I'll get into it a little bit more at the discussion that I do at the end, but this ink doesn't really coat the sides of the vial. Like, I can shake it up and it doesn't take very long for the ink to kind of slide down off the sides of the vial. I don't know, I was just that made me expect this to be a watery ink, but this is, I'm going to go ahead and put smooth here. Smooth for an extra fine like this. I would expect a little more feedback. Very, very pleasant. Next, I've got a Pilot Grance. It has a 14 karat fine nib. This 14 karat gold fine nib is significantly wetter than the steel extra fine nib, and the extra fine I said was very pleasant, but boy, I really like this fine nib. The upstrokes are a bit dry, and sometimes you can feel that depending on the ink and paper combination. You can feel that dryness, and if it can be unpleasant, but this, when I was writing, I didn't feel any dryness. For a fine nib like this, not the feedback I was expecting to feel. Very nice again. Smoother, more smooth than I'm used to in a nib like this. Next, I've got a CCO Lily Putut. It has a stainless steel medium nib. Again, even more wet than the other two, as to be expected, and the same, I don't have enough room, but just like the others, very smooth. I haven't used this CCO medium nib in quite a while. whenever I'm doing writing samples, I'm usually using the broad nib. In the previous ink test that I did, I used the fine nib for the first time in quite a while. I'm really impressed with this medium nib. I want to try some reverse writing. Let me see. Oh, and the reverse writing is very nice. Oh, but it dries out really quickly. But really enjoying this medium nib. Next, I'll be writing with a Pilot Lucina. It has a stainless steel broad nib. That's kind of a surprise. I don't know if I've noticed this before, but the upstroke on this steel nib is a little bit drier than the others. Normally on the Pilot steel nibs, they write more uniformly, but this nib is a little bit larger than like the number 5 steel nibs that you see on like the Metropolitan and the Prera and those type of pens. And this nib has a little bit of bounce to it. And the Pilot number 5 size gold nibs have a nice amount of bounce to it. And that upstroke is drier. I wonder if those two things are related. Nice and wet. I'm just going to put a smiley face. Yes, it was smooth, enjoyable. Just the tiniest hard start over here, and I've noticed that a lot of time with Pilot pens. I don't know why that is. A lot of times on my writing samples, when I go to write Pilot, that first little downstroke has just a little bit of a skip in it, and then it writes okay. If I hadn't done the scribble, that would have happened here. But overall, very enjoyable. And finally, I'll be writing with a Pen BBS cartridge converter pen. I've replaced the stock nib with a 1.5 stainless steel stub nib. Very wet, velvety smooth. I see just tiny hints of shading, like in those vertical strokes, you can really see it. Very pleasant. Okay, while this dries, I'll take a look at some of the other writing samples. Now, I have mentioned before that I really don't like doing these ink tests or ink reviews with shimmer inks. It's just a hassle. I dip each nib in ink and do the writing sample. I can do several writing samples before I have to dip, and dipping the pen in the ink is not that big of an issue. But when I'm using a shimmer ink, I have to put the lid back on the ink, shake it up every time I go to dip a pen in the ink. In between papers, a lot of times I'll go ahead and dip the pen in the ink just to make sure the feed is fully saturated. And it's just a hassle, especially with the ink where when you shake it up, it just coats the sides and doesn't want to run back down into the vial because it gets all over the pen. Then you have to clean the pen off. In the process, while you're doing that, the nib is getting drier. It's just a big hassle. You get ink all over your fingers. And while that's not a huge deal, it's just a pain. I don't usually enjoy reviewing shimmer inks, and I'd kind of told myself I was going to stop dealing with shimmer inks. But this is a new one, and I was curious about it. And I didn't hate testing this ink. For one thing, when you shake it up, it runs down off the sides really quickly. Now, you see a little ink around the edges. I've gotten pretty good at not bumping the pens up against the sides of the vial, so I didn't make any messes during the process of testing this ink. Now, this shimmer does settle really quickly. Like, you can look down here just in the time I've been talking. Look at that. It's settled back out. So I did have to do a lot of closing up the vial, shaking it up. But this ink was so pleasant to write with that it kind of made it worthwhile. On my Rhodia paper, every pen was just very pleasant to write with. The dip pen put the ink down nice and uniformly. Now, in this dip writing that I did, I don't have a lot of shimmer. But I will go ahead and show on the Tomoe River, this is the dip pen up here. There's a lot of shimmer. And I can't remember which one I did first. I think I wrote this one before this one, which is kind of the opposite of what I would have thought. I would have thought this one would have had a lot of shimmer. And the tweezer swatch doesn't have as much shimmer as I was expecting. It's very subtle. My wide stub nib, I'm not seeing much shimmer, but the Lucina and the medium Kaweco has a lot of shimmer. The Grants has a lot of shimmer. Let's see, even in the little Kuno, lots of shimmer in that writing sample. This was enjoyable. On my copy paper, let's see, I see a little shimmer in the wide stub nib. It looks like I'm writing with the ink that doesn't have shimmer, but I had shimmer in the previous ink. They're just little shimmers here and there. But the Lucina, I'm able to see the shimmer if I turn the paper. The Kaweco, I'm seeing even more. The Grants, I see a fair amount. And in the Kuno, that little line is so fine that I can barely see it. Again, in the Kuno, it looks like I had shimmer in a previous ink and just have a little bit left over. The ink itself, writing on this absorbent copy paper, just wasn't overly pleasant. The ink spread pretty quickly as you were writing, and it just, I don't know, I don't like to see the ink spreading out. I like to see the ink floating on top of the paper, and you don't see that characteristic very often in copy paper because it's so absorbent. The little Kuno puts down such a fine line that the amount of spread you saw wasn't very noticeable, so it was the most pleasant out of all of the pens in this writing sample. In my Leuchtturm notebook, you see a little bit of shading. The shimmer's not very uniform. I'm seeing a lot of shimmer here at the beginning and very little here at the end. So that's one of the things I'm not fond of about shimmer inks. I want the shimmer to be uniform, but I do like the shading, just the very, I don't know, you can kind of see in the vertical lines, the tops of the vertical lines is just a little bit lighter. Nice looking ink. It kind of looks, it's got a little bit more green than the Namiki Blue and the Tsuyukusa. I see a little bit of green in there, but it's mostly blue, and the darkness of it is kind of in between Namiki Blue and Tsuyukusa. Turns out I have quite a few of these turquoise leaning blue inks. When I was writing with Golden Lapis, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be pretty similar to Konpeki. But Konpeki doesn't have as much of saturation as the Golden Lapis has. So you see more lightness. Now keep in mind, as I show these, I mentioned earlier that my camera does not represent teals and turquoises very accurately, but I'm going to show more turquoise-leaning inks here at the beginning. Sumire, Sailor Mano Sumire is a little more turquoisey and a little less saturated, kind of like Compeki. Noodler's Navy, we're getting closer, but it still has just a hint more green. The lapis looks a little more blue. Diamine Polar Glow has more sheen, but very similar. The base colors are very similar. I guess this one has more sheen because it's just a little more saturated. Maybe if you watered this ink down just a touch, it would look more like Golden Lapis. Three Oysters Peacock Blue looks much more green when you put it up to Golden Lapis. Suyukusa that I showed earlier is more blue. Maybe you see a little more purple in it when you compare it to Lapis. Namiki Blue looks more blue and a little less saturated maybe. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Not less saturated, just a different color. Asagao looks more purple. Diamine Blue Flame has some, I guess that's gold shimmer. But it looks more purple when you put it up to Golden Lapis. And Bay State Blue is just in a class all of its own. Pelikan Edelstein Golden Lapis had a fair amount of water resistance. You can see even down here to the extra fine, there's quite a bit of ink left behind that is quite legible. But honestly, even if all the ink was washed away, in some of the wider nibs, you could read just the shimmer that was left behind. Okay, and here's the chromatography. You can see it's not showing up on camera accurately, but this is a turquoise with a fair amount of green in it. You've got maybe a lavender color down here, and then the shimmer didn't move at all. Okay. I enjoyed writing with every one of these pens. Like I mentioned, I haven't always been fond. In fact, I have never liked reviewing shimmer inks, but this one was very enjoyable. Someone had suggested using a Lamy pen with shimmer inks and gave me some pointers on how to make that work. So I ordered some Lamy nibs, some replacement nibs I already had a fine nib, and I have a 14 karat gold extra fine nib that I use on my Lamy logo. So I went ahead and bought an extra fine steel nib. I've already got the fine steel nib. And then I got a medium and a broad and a 1.1 stub nib. That my plan is the next time I review a shimmer ink, which I got one by accident when I ordered some samples recently, but it looks like a really pretty ink. So my plan is, instead of dip testing, which is kind of a hassle, go ahead and ink up that Lamy logo and just swap nibs. So I'm going to try that in my next ink review, see how that works out. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.